She checked herself into a psychiatric hospital because she was depressed. When she checked out, she had a plan to have her husband shot in his sleep. The plan worked. The husband died, and then she got married again before anyone thought to arrest her. This is the story of Celeste Johnson Stephen Beard. To understand this case, you have to understand who Celeste Beard was before Stephen. Celeste Johnson's biological parents are unknown. She met her birth mother only one time and was told, "I am not your mother, I was just your incubator." She was adopted. Her adoptive father, by her account, abused her throughout childhood. She attempted suicide during puberty. At 17, she got pregnant. She gave birth to twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, and married their father, a man named Craig Bratcher, who was physically abusive. That marriage fell apart. Bratcher later committed suicide. She married twice more after that. Each marriage ended. By the time Celeste was in her early 30s, she had been married 3 times, had 2 teenage daughters, and was working as a waitress at the Austin Country Club. That's where she met Stephen Beard. Beard was a retired Fox broadcasting executive and self-made multimillionaire more than twice her age, was a widower whose wife had died of cancer. He was 70 years old when he married Celeste. She was 32. His family and friends were suspicious from the start. The age gap was enormous. The circumstances were obvious. But Stephen Beard was a man who had recently lost his wife of 42 years. He was lonely. And Celeste was beautiful and attentive and, at least in the beginning, devoted. Johnson moved in with Beard after he convinced her that he would legally adopt her daughters. They moved into an expensive home in Westlake Hills, a wealthy suburb of Austin. They had a budget, a lifestyle, a world that Celeste had never had access to before. And then she started spending. This is the foundation of everything that follows, because the motive in this case is not passion, it's not revenge, it's not mental illness, it's money, specifically the fear of losing access to it. According to Beard's accountant, Johnson spent $321,000 in October and November 1999, an additional $249,000 by December 10, and another $100,000 in the 6 weeks ending March 31, 2000. In under 6 months, Celeste spent nearly $700,000 of her husband's money. In under 6 months. And it had been going on for years before that got as extreme as those numbers show. Celeste Beard told ABC News that the couple's budget was $35,000 a month, and she was spending much more than that. Just months after their marriage, Stephen Beard discovered that Celeste Beard had been taking his late wife's jewelry and silver out of his safe deposit box. He was so disturbed by this that he filed for divorce. They reconciled. He withdrew the petition. But the spending didn't stop. The marriage didn't heal. It stumbled forward, rocky and miserable, while Celeste burned through Stephen's money and Stephen grew progressively more tired of it. By 1999, the word divorce was in the air again. In early 1999, Celeste voluntarily checked herself into St. David's Pavilion, a psychiatric hospital in Austin, Texas. She was being treated for depression. Whatever was or wasn't happening in her marriage, Celeste was genuinely struggling. Her mental health history was real. The depression was real. The hospitalizations were not a performance, at least not entirely. But something happened at St. David's that changed everything. While there, she met Tracy Tarleton, a bookstore manager who was openly gay. The two women soon grew close. While Celeste would later deny anything romantic occurred, Tarleton described the relationship as intimate. Tracy Tarleton was in the psychiatric unit being treated for depression and suicidal ideation. She was fragile. She was desperate for connection. And Celeste Beard, whether deliberately or instinctively, became her anchor. During her testimony at trial, Tarleton told the jury that she and Celeste were in a romantic relationship. "I felt like I loved her, and I believed that she loved me. She spent a lot of time letting me know that she did." Celeste, for her part, denied the romantic element completely. She said Tracy was a friend, a troubled friend who became obsessed with her. That's her version. What is not disputed is what happened after they both left the hospital. According to Tracy Tarleton's testimony, and this is the testimony that convicted Celeste, Celeste spent months after they left St. David's building a case to Tracy for why Stephen Beard needed to die. She told Tracy that Stephen was abusive, that he was driving her toward suicide, that the only way they could ever be together, really together, as a couple, was if Stephen was gone. She goes on to say that before Stephen was discharged from the rehabilitation center, Celeste told her that she wasn't going to hire a home health aide because she planned to infect Stephen's wounds herself. Tracy believed her. She believed that Celeste loved her. She believed that shooting Stephen was the only way to save Celeste and build a life together. The couple planned an extended trip to Europe together, but the morning before they were supposed to leave, on October 2, 1999, Stephen Beard was shot. 2 days before the Europe trip, while Stephen was asleep in his own home. The crime happened in an Austin mansion on October 2, 1999. It was near 3:30 a.m. when police received a 911 call from 74-year-old Stephen Beard. Stephen had been shot in the stomach with a shotgun. He was conscious enough to call 911 himself. He was rushed to the hospital. When investigators arrived at the scene and spoke to Celeste, she told them she had been in another room when the shooting occurred. She heard nothing. She knew nothing. Tracy Tarleton was arrested 6 days later. A shotgun cartridge found near the scene was matched to a shotgun in Tracy's possession. Tracy admitted to shooting Stephen but would not say why. And here is where it gets interesting. Because for months after the shooting, while Stephen clung to life in the hospital, Tracy kept her mouth shut. She didn't give Celeste up. She took the full weight of it and stayed silent. Why? Because she still believed Celeste loved her. Stephen Beard survived the initial shooting. He was hospitalized for months. He underwent surgeries. He was fighting to live. And Celeste, after Stephen's funeral, she was observed partying. Then 6 months after his death, she married another man. Wait, Stephen wasn't dead yet when she started behaving this way. While her husband was hospitalized fighting for his life, Celeste hired a criminal defense lawyer and denied investigators access to her husband. She blocked police from interviewing the man who'd been shot in his own home, her husband, the victim. Her daughter Jennifer said, "The way she acted wouldn't be a way a widow would act. I just remember her laughing a lot, kind of in a way that she was relieved that he wasn't around anymore." When Stephen was released from the rehabilitation center, Celeste told Tracy she wasn't going to hire a home health aide because she planned to infect Stephen's wounds herself. He was readmitted one day after coming home. His condition worsened. By the morning of January 22, 2000, Stephen's condition had worsened with a blood test showing he did have an infection. Antibiotics were ordered in the morning but not administered until 1 p.m. Stephen Beard died later that afternoon. The cause of death was recorded as septic shock. The infection, the delayed antibiotics, the home health aide she refused to hire, whether any of it was deliberate or whether it was the original wound finally winning, investigators had to consider all of it. With Stephen dead, Tracy Tarleton faced an upgraded murder charge. She was in jail, and she was still, remarkably, staying silent to protect Celeste. Then something happened. 5 months after his death, Celeste married 41-year-old Cole Johnson. Tracy remained silent until she saw the newspaper announcement of Celeste's new marriage. There it was, in a newspaper. Celeste Beard, the woman who had told Tracy they would be together, who had convinced her that killing Stephen was the only way, was now married to another man. Not 5 months after her husband's death. Tracy called investigators, and she told them everything. She told them about the relationship, about Celeste's plan, about being manipulated into believing this was an act of love, about the conversations where Celeste had plotted Stephen's death and described it to Tracy as their only path to a future together. Tracy Tarleton pleaded guilty to murder. She accepted a plea deal of a 22-year sentence in exchange for testifying against her one-time friend and lover. On March 28, 2002, Celeste Beard Johnson was arrested and charged with capital murder, and injury to an elderly individual. Celeste hired famed Texas defense attorney Dick DeGuerin. She pleaded not guilty. The defense strategy was essentially this. Tracy Tarleton was a mentally unstable, obsessive woman who had become delusional about her relationship with Celeste. She acted alone. She invented the romantic relationship. Her testimony was the product of a disturbed mind. And Celeste's daughters, who were about to testify against their own mother, were doing it for the money. DeGuerin alleged that Johnson's daughters lied on the witness stand because they would inherit no money if their mother was acquitted. That's the defense. The daughters are liars, Tracy is delusional, Celeste is innocent. Then the prosecution played a tape. They presented a damning piece of evidence to the jury, a recording of Celeste telling Christina, "I hired somebody to kill Tracy." She was trying to have her accomplice killed, the only person who could put her away, and she said it out loud on a phone call to her own daughter. Celeste denied that she said that, claiming that her daughters had spliced the tape. The judge ruled the tape was authentic and admissible. The twins would also testify that their mother would tell them she married Stephen for his money, that he disgusted her, and that when he died she would get all of his money. Christina, one of Celeste's daughters, answered, "I do not remember," to defense questions 298 times during cross-examination. She was protecting as much as she could while still telling the truth about what mattered. The jury heard 6 weeks of testimony from over 100 witnesses. On March 19, 2003, Celeste was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive 40-year terms. She will be eligible for parole in April 2042, when she will be 79 years old. Tracy Tarleton, who pulled the trigger, served 10 years of her 20-year sentence and was paroled in 2011. She moved to San Antonio. She was taken off parole in 2021. Celeste Beard Johnson has maintained her innocence for more than 20 years. She has given interviews from prison. She has filed appeals. She has insisted that Tracy was obsessed with her, that her daughters lied, that she is a victim of the justice system. "My kids sold me to the state of Texas," she has said. "I've been rotting in here for something that I didn't do." Her daughters Jennifer and Christina cut off contact with her after the trial. Jennifer Beard said the trial was the last time she ever saw her mother. When asked from her jail cell what she would tell her daughters if she could speak to them, Celeste said, "I would tell them that I always loved them, and I'm sorry that I wasn't the mother that you needed me to be." That's the closest she has ever come to acknowledging that something went wrong. Not the murder, not the manipulation, not the gambling with Tracy Tarleton's heart and Stephen Beard's life. Just, "I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed." The woman who planned the murder is still in prison. The woman who committed it has been free for over a decade. The Celeste Beard case is a masterclass in how manipulation works at its most sophisticated level. Tracy Tarleton was not a hired gun. She was not a professional criminal. She was a woman in a psychiatric hospital who fell in love with another patient and was then slowly, methodically convinced that killing someone was an act of devotion. Celeste didn't offer Tracy money. She offered her something more powerful than money. She offered her a future, a relationship, love. She made Tracy believe that the path to that love ran directly through Stephen Beard's bedroom on October 2, 1999. And when it was over, when Stephen was dead and Tracy was in jail, Celeste married someone else within 5 months. Tracy was a means to an end. The moment the end was achieved, Tracy ceased to matter. Celeste had already moved on. The recording of Celeste saying she hired someone to kill Tracy tells you everything you need to know. She wasn't just willing to use someone to kill her husband. She was willing to kill the person she used to protect herself from the consequences. That's not passion. That's not desperation. That's calculation at a level that most people cannot comprehend. He was 74 years old when he was shot in his bed at 3:30 in the morning. He had been a self-made man. He had loved a woman for 42 years and lost her to cancer. He found someone new. He built another life. He trusted Celeste. He adopted her daughters. He gave them his name and access to his estate. He opened his home and his money and his life to a woman and her children because he didn't want to be alone. He never had reason to suspect what was coming. Several witnesses saw no unusual problems in Johnson and Beard's marriage. From the outside, it looked like two people navigating the ordinary difficulties of a relationship. Stephen was shot by someone he had never met, arranged by someone he slept next to every night. Because his wife was afraid he was going to divorce her and cut off her access to his bank accounts. That is the whole of it, the whole reason: money, access, lifestyle. He was shot at 3:30 in the morning over a spending habit and a divorce threat. He died on January 22, 2000. He was 75 years old. Celeste Beard Johnson is currently incarcerated at the Christina Melton Crane Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She is 62 years old. She will not be eligible for parole until she is 79. She has given dozens of interviews. She has never admitted guilt. She has never, in any public forum, acknowledged what she did to Stephen Beard, what she did to Tracy Tarleton, what she did to her own daughters. In 2004, the very first episode of the true crime television show Snapped was about Celeste Beard Johnson. She was case number 1. The producers looked at hundreds of cases and decided hers was the one to open with. There's a reason for that. It has everything: wealth, manipulation, a psychiatric hospital romance weaponized into murder, a woman who remarried before the body was cold, a tape recording of a mother telling her daughter she hired a hitman to kill her accomplice, and an old man who trusted the wrong person and paid for it with his life. If this kind of deep-dive storytelling is what you come here for, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. The FBI profiled the killer as a white male, aged 25 to 40, with a history of sexual assault or child pornography. The killer was a Sunday school teacher who ran up to investigators at the search scene, crying and hyperventilating, and handed them a note she had written herself. Tracy is a dairy town about 60 miles east of San Francisco. Population around 80,000 at the time of this case. It has the kind of community feel where people know their neighbors, kids play outside, and the local church is a gathering point for the whole area. Orchard Estates Mobile Home Park sits on Clover Road in Tracy. It's a tight-knit little community within a community. Neighbors know each other. Kids run between the trailers. Parents keep an informal watch on the neighborhood children. Sandra Renee Cantu lived there with her mother Maria Chavez, her grandparents, and her 3 older siblings. She was a second-grade student at Melville S. Jacobson Elementary School. She was 8 years old. She was the kind of kid that everyone in the neighborhood knew: bright, friendly, always moving, always skipping. A few addresses down from Sandra's home lived a 28-year-old woman named Melissa Huckabee. She was a single mother. Her 5-year-old daughter was one of Sandra's playmates, and Melissa's grandfather was the pastor at Clover Road Baptist Church, just up the road from the mobile home park. Melissa Huckabee taught Sunday school at that church. On Friday, March 27, 2009, Cantu played at a friend's house after school until approximately 4. 2:00 p.m., after which she returned home. At 3:54 p.m., a security camera at Orchard Estates captured Sandra skipping down the street. It was the last footage of her alive. She was seen suddenly looking over in the direction where Melissa Huckabee lived, then walks out of the view of the surveillance camera. 8 minutes later, Melissa Huckabee was seen on the same camera driving her black Kia SUV out of the mobile home park, heading in the direction of Clover Road Baptist Church. At roughly the same moment Huckabee was driving away from the park, she called the mobile home park manager to say, "My Eddie Bauer suitcase has been stolen from the front of my trailer." She reported her suitcase stolen while Sandra Cantu was in her car. According to prosecutors, by the time Sandra's mother, Maria Chavez, called police to report Sandra missing at 7:53 p.m. March 27, 2009, the 8-year-old girl had already been killed and her body disposed of by Huckabee. Sandra had been dead for hours by the time her mother picked up the phone. When Maria Chavez called police that evening, Tracy went into full search mode.
Where is 8-year-old Sandra Cantu?
FBI agents, firefighters, volunteers, they combed through Orchard Estates and the surrounding areas. They knocked on doors. They searched vacant lots. They put up flyers. They organized search parties. The whole community mobilized for a little girl who hadn't come home. The next morning, March 28, something happened that would later become one of the most significant moments in the investigation. They reported she was very agitated, crying, hyperventilating. Huckabee approached investigators with a handwritten note that read, "Cantu locked in Stalin's suitcase thrown in water on Baquetti Ard and Whitehall Ard. Witness." She ran up to police. She was in tears. She was shaking. She had found a note. Someone had left a note in the neighborhood telling them where Sandra was. The misspellings were significant. Stalin for stolen, on for on. The handwriting was disguised. Investigators went to the irrigation pond at Baquetti and Whitehall Roads. They searched. They didn't find anything yet, but they kept the note, and they kept an eye on Melissa Huckabee. Investigators took notice of the unusual fact that a woman who reported losing a suitcase should be the one woman out of everyone in this complex who should happen to find a note that reports that the stolen suitcase was used to hide the child's body. Here is what almost nobody talks about when they discuss this case. Sandra Cantu was not Melissa Huckabee's first target. Police said Huckabee was named in a January police report about the 4-hour disappearance of a 7-year-old girl from the same mobile home park. After Huckabee returned the girl, she had to be taken to a hospital because she was under the influence of a strong muscle relaxant. Months before Sandra disappeared, same mobile home park, a 7-year-old girl vanished for 4 hours. When she came back, she was slurring her words, couldn't walk properly. The hospital found muscle relaxants in her system. Huckabee's name was in the police report. Nothing happened. The girl survived. There was no arrest, and Sandra Cantu was still alive then. Rubbing alcohol and traces of alprazolam, a form of the muscle relaxant anti-anxiety drug benzodiazepine, was found in the 7-year-old girl's system. The same drug that would later be found in Sandra Cantu. Melissa Huckabee had practiced. That's the only way to say it. She had taken a child, drugged her, returned her, and suffered no legal consequence. And months later she did it again. But this time, Sandra Cantu didn't come back. For 10 days, the search continued. 10 days of flyers and searches and vigils, and a community holding its breath. On April 6, a suitcase containing Cantu's body was found during routine draining of an irrigation pond. The suitcase was brought to the coroner's office. It was opened. Inside was Sandra Cantu. The autopsy would reveal everything that had been done to her in that church. The San Joaquin County pathologist determined Sandra Cantu suffered a cut to her lower inner lip and an abrasion on her left elbow. She also had injuries to external genitalia that were consistent with the diameter of the rolling pin handles. He listed the cause of death as homicidal asphyxiation. He found a piece of torn cloth tied around her head. It was soiled with blood and knotted into a noose. Toxicological analysis revealed her body contained alprazolam. She had been drugged. She had been assaulted. She had been strangled with a noose made from a torn piece of cloth. She was 8 years old. The suitcase was Eddie Bauer brand, the same brand Melissa Huckabee had reported stolen on March 27, the same afternoon Sandra disappeared. Investigators went to Melissa Huckabee. They showed her the suitcase. They asked her to confirm it was hers. She confirmed it. She said someone had stolen it. She had no idea how it ended up in the pond. But investigators were already piecing it together. The surveillance footage, the 8-minute window, the note she had handed to police, the reported theft of the very suitcase Sandra was found in. And then they searched Clover Road Baptist Church. When Clover Road Baptist Church was searched on April 6, 2009, police found a rolling pin with blood on it that contained Sandra's DNA. Investigators also found that one of the church's window blinds was missing a draw cord, and the cord that was used to tie shut the Eddie Bauer suitcase was later determined to be a match for the cords on the other church blinds. The rolling pin with Sandra's blood, the matching blind cord, the church where Melissa taught Sunday school, where her grandfather was the pastor, where she had been driving when Sandra disappeared. It was all connected. On the evening of April 10, Melissa Huckabee gave a telephone interview to a reporter from the Tracy Press named Jennifer Wadsworth. Investigators had listened in on the interview she gave the Tracy Press, courtesy of a court-approved wiretap, in which details she talked about differed from her interviews with detectives. She was talking to a reporter, investigators were listening, and what she was saying didn't match what she had told police. She said there had been a lot of speculation on the news about what happened to my suitcase. It's not my granddad's, it's mine and someone took it. She also told the reporter that Sandra had come to her home that day but left to go to a friend's house when Huckabee wouldn't let her daughter play, that Sandra walked away, that Huckabee never took her anywhere. All of it was a lie. Investigators knew it was a lie, and the wiretap confirmed it. The night of April 10, following her interview with the Tracy Press, officers arrested Huckabee and charged her with Cantu's murder. Melissa Huckabee was arrested while she was still on the phone with media, still constructing her story, still performing innocence. The charges against Melissa Huckabee were as serious as charges get in California. On April 10, 2009, Huckabee was arrested and charged with the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Cantu. If convicted of all charges, she faced the death penalty. Additionally, she received further charges regarding the drugging of a 7-year-old girl and a 37-year-old man.
The woman charged in the murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu may be linked to another possible crime. David Begnaud of our Sacramento station, KOVR, is in Tracy, California, with more. David.
Julie, as accused child killer Melissa Huckabee sits on suicide watch in the county jail this morning, there are new and explosive allegations that Huckabee is tied to the report of another child abduction back in January. Melissa Huckabee, the Tracy, California woman charged with the murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu, now faces new questions. That months before Cantu disappeared, Huckabee may have taken and drugged yet another 7-year-old neighborhood girl. January 17th, 5:17 p.m. A woman, a neighbor of the Cantu family, calls police to say that her daughter is missing. 5:31 p.m. Police report the girl is with Melissa Huckabee at a nearby park. 5:39 p.m. The girl is returned and police leave without filing any charges. Later that very same night, the 7-year-old girl was taken here from the mobile home park to a nearby hospital, where doctors say she tested positive for a muscle relaxer. Immediately raising questions, did Melissa Huckabee drug the girl? Sources say police couldn't prove that because 5 hours had passed from the time the child was dropped off to the time she tested positive, allowing enough time for the girl to have gotten the pills from someone other than Huckabee. Now, on the night Huckabee was arrested, she told CBS News in a phone conversation that she did in fact take the little girl to a nearby park, but she claims she had permission to do it.
Melissa Huckabee did not go to trial. In June 2010, more than a year after Sandra's death, she entered a guilty plea. Huckabee pleaded guilty to the kidnapping and murder of Cantu and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in 2010. The charges regarding the druggings were dropped as part of the plea bargain in order to avoid the death penalty. She avoided the death penalty. She avoided a trial. She avoided having every detail of what happened in that church presented in public, in front of a jury, in front of Sandra's family. At sentencing, Melissa Huckabee stood in court and said, "I still cannot understand why I did what I did. This is a question I will struggle with for the rest of my life." No motive was ever officially established. The prosecutor in the case speculated that she killed Sandra for attention. Attention, the same word investigators had used to describe her behavior during the search. The hyperventilating, the note, the interview with the reporter, all of it was, in some terrible way, a performance, a way to be at the center of something, to matter, to be seen. Sandra Cantu was killed so that Melissa Huckabee could be the woman who found the note, the neighbor who helped, the Sunday school teacher who wept at the search scene. The last evidence that Sandra was alive, captured in a surveillance video at 3:54 p.m. on March 27, 2009, came just 8 minutes before Huckabee was seen driving her Kia SUV out of Orchard Estates Mobile Home Park. In that footage, Sandra is skipping, just skipping down the street the way children do, with no weight in the world, heading toward her neighbor's house to play. She was 8 years old. She was a second grader. She was the kind of child who skipped everywhere she went. The Tracy community called her Tracy's Angel after she died. Her school built a playground in her name. They put up buddy benches with her name on them to encourage kindness between children. She disappeared on a Friday afternoon. She had been dead for hours before her mother realized she hadn't come home. The person who killed her was someone Sandra's family trusted, someone who had been inside their community, inside their social circle, inside their church, someone who Sandra had no reason to fear and every reason to follow. That's the thing that Tracy has never quite recovered from, not just the horror of what happened, but who did it. Let's return to what the FBI said at the start of the investigation. The profile that FBI experts assigned to the case was a white male aged between 25 and 40 with a criminal history of sexual assault or child pornography. Everything about that profile was reasonable given the evidence, the nature of the crime, the way Sandra disappeared, the evidence of assault. Statistically, the overwhelming majority of crimes fitting this profile are committed by men. The FBI profile was wrong. The killer was a 28-year-old woman, a mother, a Sunday school teacher, the granddaughter of a pastor, someone who, by every observable metric, should have been nowhere near the profile. And that is the counterintuitive core of this case. We construct mental models of what danger looks like. We protect our children from strangers who match those models. We teach them about bad men. We tell them to run. Melissa Huckabee did not fit the model. She was a woman in the community, a familiar face, someone Sandra's mother had no reason to tell Sandra to avoid. The model failed Sandra Cantu. Melissa Huckabee was not someone who appeared out of nowhere. There were signs, there were incidents, there were moments when the system could have intervened. In November 2008, Melissa Huckabee was alleged to have committed theft at a Target store. In January 2009, she pled no contest to a felony charge of second-degree commercial burglary and a misdemeanor charge of property theft. She served time in Los Angeles County and was on probation in San Joaquin County. She was on probation when she killed Sandra Cantu, on probation, under supervision of the court, required to check in with a probation officer, and still she took a child. The 7-year-old girl she drugged months earlier, that incident went nowhere. No arrest, no deeper investigation. The girl recovered and the case was essentially set aside. Huckabee had a history of mental health problems, including borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. She had been in and out of treatment. She was known to be unstable. None of it was enough to keep Sandra Cantu safe. More than 4,500 people turned out for Sandra Cantu's memorial at West High School in Tracy. Television crews lined the streets outside the mausoleum where she was laid to rest. The murder of Sandra Cantu left an indelible mark on the Tracy community. For many residents, the idea that such a horrific crime could be committed by someone within their tight-knit neighborhood was a source of deep fear and sorrow. The mobile home park where Sandra grew up changed after her death. Parents who had let their kids run free the way parents in close communities do, they stopped. Children who had been allowed to knock on neighbors' doors, to play wherever they wanted within the park, they were brought inside. The church on Clover Road, the pond on Bacchetti and Whitehall, the suitcase, the note, all of it became geography that the community had to live around, had to pass every day. Melissa Huckabee didn't just take Sandra. She took the safety that a community had built for itself. She took the trust that neighbors extend to each other in a place like Orchard Estates. She took something that could not be returned. Melissa Huckabee is an American woman sentenced to life without parole in California for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Sandra Cantu. 8. On March 27, 2009. She is in her early 40s now. She will die in prison. She has never provided a motive. She has never explained what happened in that church beyond the absurd hide-and-seek story she gave investigators. She said at sentencing that she cannot understand why she did what she did. Whether that's true or whether it's the final performance in a long series of performances, only Melissa Huckabee knows. Sandra Cantu would be 24 years old in 2025. She would have graduated high school. She might be in college. She might have a job, a life, plans. Instead, she is Tracy's angel, a playground, a buddy bench, a face on a flyer, a case that changed how a community understood danger. The surveillance footage of her skipping down the street at 3:54 p.m. on March 27, 2009, is the last anyone saw of her alive. She was skipping, just a little girl skipping home. 8 minutes later, she was gone. If this kind of deep-dive storytelling is what you come here for, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. A woman duct-taped her 4-day-old son's mouth shut, crossed his tiny arms over his chest, sealed him in a black trash bag, and dropped him in a dumpster. She went home, made dinner, and nobody found out for 5 years. Beaumont, Texas, a mid-sized city in Jefferson County, about 85 miles east of Houston. It's the kind of place where people work hard, keep to themselves, and don't ask too many questions about their neighbors' lives. Kenesha Iranda Berry was 25 years old in 1998. She had 3 children, Jasmine, Kirsten, and a son named Joskin, all fathered by a man named Joskin Love. She was raising them on her own, working, getting by. To everyone who knew her, she was a mother doing what she had to do. What nobody knew was that Kenesha Berry had a system, a cold, deliberate, hidden system, and it had nothing to do with the chaos of poverty or desperation. It was about control. Sometime in 1998, Kenesha became pregnant again, but not by Joskin Love. This pregnancy was by a man named Nicholas Beard, a different father, an unwanted complication. When she became pregnant with Malachi by another man, she hid her pregnancy and delivered him at home while her children were at school. When they returned and saw the baby, she told them she was babysitting for a friend. Read that again. She gave birth alone in her home without a single person knowing she was pregnant. And when her own children came home and saw a newborn baby, she told them it belonged to someone else. She had hidden an entire pregnancy. Every doctor's visit skipped, every physical change concealed. Nobody knew, not her family, not her friends, not Joskin Love, not a soul. The baby was born on November 25, 1998. Kenesha named him Malachi. She fed him twice. That was it. 4 days after Malachi was born, Kenesha Berry made a decision. On November 29, 1998, in Jefferson County, Texas, Kenesha Berry placed duct tape across the body and mouth of her 4-day-old son, placed him in a black plastic trash bag, and left his body in a trash dumpster, resulting in his death. She duct taped his mouth. She crossed his arms over his abdomen and duct taped them in place. She put him inside a black plastic trash bag, and she borrowed her grandmother's vehicle, put Malachi in the trunk, drove to a dumpster, and threw him inside. The forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy later testified that Malachi was still alive when he was placed in that bag. The combination of being duct taped and covered with a plastic trash bag was consistent with oxygen deprivation. He determined that the infant died from asphyxia due to smothering. As the baby died, there was a large release of fecal material from the rectum. He died alone, in a trash bag in a dumpster. He was 4 days old. In the early morning hours of November 29, 1998, Roy Black and his wife Ima were doing what they did most mornings, searching dumpsters at the apartment complex where they lived, looking for aluminum cans to supplement their income. Roy found the deceased male infant inside a trash bag with duct tape over his mouth. His arms were secured across his chest with duct tape, and there was fecal matter inside the trash bag. Ima alerted the police and named the infant Baby Hope. The name Baby Hope, given by a woman who found him in the trash and couldn't bear to leave him nameless. It's one of the most devastating details in this entire case, that his name, the only name the world knew him by for 5 years, came from a stranger who stumbled on him while looking for aluminum cans. Beaumont police arrived. The medical examiner took custody of the body. The investigation began. And then it stalled completely. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, no hospital records because Kenesha had given birth at home. No one had reported a pregnancy. No one had reported a missing baby. There was nothing to trace back to anyone. A latent palm print on the trash bag was collected. A latent fingerprint on a piece of duct tape was collected. They ran the prints. Nothing came back. Whoever did this wasn't in the system. Investigators named the baby Hope, gave him a proper burial, and kept the case open. But with no leads, no identity, no suspect, Baby Hope became a cold case. One of thousands of unidentified infant homicides that sit in detective files across the country, unsolved and largely forgotten by everyone except the detectives who worked them. 5 years passed. Kenesha Berry went on with her life. She worked. She raised her 3 children. She carried what she had done and never told a single person. She kept her secret so completely that not even the people closest to her had any idea she had ever been pregnant with Malachi. Here is the detail that stops you cold. During those 5 years, while Baby Hope sat in an unmarked grave and his case went nowhere, Kenesha Berry was working at a Beaumont daycare center. When she was arrested for abandoning Paris, Berry had worked for more than a year caring for toddlers at a Beaumont daycare. She had also worked as a corrections officer. A woman who duct-taped a 4-day-old baby and left him to die in a dumpster spent the following years professionally responsible for other people's children. She bathed them. She fed them. She held them. And she did it with complete composure. Because for Kenesha Berry, what happened to Malachi wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't a crisis. It was a decision she had made, lived with, and moved on from. That is the most chilling thing about this case. Not the act itself, as horrific as it is. It's the functioning that followed, the normal life, the daycare job, the 5 years of silence. In the spring of 2003, Kenesha became pregnant again. And again, the father was not Joskin Love. This time the father was a man named Leonard Carrier. Again, the pregnancy was hidden. Again, she gave birth alone at home. This time the baby was a girl. Kenesha named her Paris. And this time, instead of a dumpster, she chose a roadside ditch. Paris was found covered in ants by 83-year-old Andrew Durham on an early morning walk down Hillebrand Road. This child survived. Poison from hundreds of ant bites caused seizures and necessitated a blood transfusion. The baby was hospitalized for nearly a month. Paris survived. Barely. The ant bites had caused seizures severe enough to require a blood transfusion. She spent almost a month in the hospital recovering from what had been done to her. Anonymous tips started coming in to Jefferson County investigators. People were pointing toward Kenesha Berry as Paris's mother. On June 12, 2003, Kenesha Berry walked into the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and told deputies that Paris was her daughter. On the surface, that seems like a moment of conscience, like someone who couldn't carry it anymore. It wasn't, or at least that's not all it was. She had been named. The tips were pointing at her. She walked in because the walls were closing in, and walking in gave her some control over the narrative. What she did not anticipate was what happened next. During the course of the investigation, appellant took Beavers to the dumpster where baby Hope had been found. She showed investigators the dumpster. She walked a detective to the exact location where baby Hope had been found 5 years earlier. Whether she did it intentionally or not, whether she thought confessing to Paris would protect her from scrutiny about baby Hope, we'll never know. What we know is that the detective she walked to that dumpster had a very good memory. A latent palm print on the trash bag matched appellant's right palm. A latent fingerprint on a piece of duct tape matched appellant's left index finger. DNA testing of the victim's blood and appellant's oral swabs indicated a 99.98% probability that appellant was the mother of the victim. 5 years. The prints had been sitting there for 5 years. Beaumont police officer John Bowles had the fingerprints from the baby Hope case compared to Kenesha Berry's. The palm print on the trash bag was hers. The fingerprint on the duct tape was hers. The DNA was a 99.98% match for maternity. Baby Hope had a name. His name was Malachi Berry, and his mother had just walked into the sheriff's office and led investigators back to the dumpster where she had left him. Think about the odds of that. If Kenesha had never been connected to Paris, if Paris had never survived, if Andrew Durham had taken a different road that morning, Malachi might have stayed baby Hope forever. One 83-year-old man's morning walk. That's what cracked a 5-year-old murder case. When confronted with the evidence, Kenesha did not confess to murdering Malachi. She testified at trial that she did not kill her baby. She knew that she was pregnant in 1998 but did not know how far along she was. She did not tell her family or anyone else about her pregnancy. She gave birth at home by herself and named the infant Malachi. He appeared to be healthy when he was born, and she fed him milk from a bottle. His nose started running the next day. When she returned from the store, he was still asleep on the bed. She lay on the couch to watch television and later checked on him because she was concerned that he had not yet awakened. When she went into the bedroom, he was limp and was not moving or breathing. She realized that he was dead but did not call for help because she was scared and did not know if it was against the law to have a baby at home. She put duct tape over his arms because they were splayed out and it was frightening to her. That's her story. He died naturally. She panicked. She duct-taped his arms because they were spread out and it scared her. She put him in a bag and drove to a dumpster because she was scared and didn't know what else to do. The prosecution had a forensic pathologist who said otherwise. The petechiae in Malachi's lungs were consistent with oxygen deprivation. The duct tape over his mouth was consistent with smothering. The placement inside a sealed plastic bag was consistent with asphyxiation. The jury heard both accounts. They believed the forensic pathologist. The detail that became central at trial wasn't just what happened to Malachi and Paris. It was the pattern underneath it. CPS worker Tracy Rydox testified that appellant's infant daughter Paris was fathered by a man named Leonard Carrier, and her 3 older children were fathered by a man named Joskin Love. 3 children by Joskin Love, kept, loved, raised. Malachi, fathered by Nicholas Beard, killed. Kenesha Berry went to trial in February 2004, charged with capital murder, the murder of a child under 6 years of age. The prosecution laid out the timeline, the hidden pregnancy, the home birth, the duct tape, the dumpster, the fingerprints, the DNA, the matching prints from both the bag and the tape. They presented the forensic pathology findings. They presented the evidence from the Paris case, the second abandonment, the fire ant bites, the blood transfusion. They argued that Malachi and Paris were not isolated incidents but a pattern, a method. The defense countered with mental health experts who testified that Kenesha had been severely depressed and under extreme stress at the time of both incidents. They argued that these were moments of crisis, not cold calculation. The jury deliberated, and then they convicted. Kenesha Berry was found guilty of capital murder. The judge sentenced her to death. Paris, fathered by Leonard Carrier, abandoned in a ditch. The prosecution's position was that Kenesha Berry had a system. The children she had by Joskin Love were her family. The children she had by other men were a problem to be disposed of. Defense witnesses testified that these 2 incidents were out of character, and that she was a loving and caring mother to her other 3 children. And that's what made it so hard to process. She was, by all accounts, a loving mother to Jasmine, Kirsten, and Joskin Jr. She read to them. She cared for them. She was present for them. She simply decided that Malachi and Paris did not fit, and she acted on that decision with a coldness that the defense could not adequately explain. In 2007, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case. Because a rational jury would have necessarily entertained a reasonable doubt as to the probability of appellant's future dangerousness, the court affirmed the judgment of conviction and reformed the trial court's judgment to reflect a sentence of imprisonment for life. The death sentence was overturned, not because of innocence, not because the conviction was wrong, but because the prosecution had misstated the future dangerousness question to the jury, asking them to consider whether Kenesha would be dangerous in the free world, when in reality the question should have been whether she would be dangerous in prison. Appellant murdered 1 child and abandoned another, but defense witnesses testified that these 2 incidents were out of character and that she was a loving and caring mother to her other 3 children. She had no criminal record, and the state presented no other evidence of violence in her past. All of her offenses involved a pregnancy, but testimony showed that her potential for becoming pregnant while incarcerated would be extremely low. Further, if she received a life sentence and were paroled 40 years later, she would be in her 60s and likely beyond her childbearing years. A 5-4 decision. 4 justices dissented. 1 wrote, "The court understood the jury's decision in response to the death of 1 infant and the abandonment of another, even if that decision was not supported in law." Kenesha Berry's death sentence was reduced to life in prison. Cases like this one are hard to sit with, not because the facts are complicated, they're not. The facts are straightforward. A woman killed 1 baby and nearly killed another. She was caught, tried, and convicted. Justice, in the conventional sense, was served. What's hard is the functioning. The 5 years of normal life, the daycare job, the 3 children she loved and raised without incident, the ability to hold someone else's toddler at work and go home and live with what she knew she had done. Malachi Berry was alive for 4 days. He was fed twice. He was named. And then he was sealed in a plastic bag by the person who was supposed to protect him most. He spent 5 years in an unmarked grave while his mother lived her life, while she changed diapers at a daycare, while she tucked in his older siblings at night. Ima Black named him Baby Hope. She gave him that the morning she found him. It was the kindest thing anyone did for Malachi Berry, and it came from a stranger who was just looking for aluminum cans. Kenesha Berry is serving a life term in prison for the capital murder of her son Malachi. She is housed in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She will not be eligible for parole until she is well into her 60s, decades from now. Paris, the daughter she abandoned on Hillebrand Road, survived. She was placed into state care. What became of her after that is not part of the public record. Jasmine, Kirsten, and Joskin Jr., the 3 children Kenesha kept, grew up without their mother. And Baby Hope, who was Malachi all along, got a name on his grave. That much at least was put right. If stories like this pull you in, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now, because the truth gets darker, deeper, and far more unsettling from here.